This content is being brought to you by the Bourbon Real Talk American Whiskey Aroma Kit. This is a tool that I put together to help all you whiskey aficionados out there develop your palates. You can sit down with the vials and train your senses, or you can sit down with a great dram and break that whiskey down to its components. If you have any interest in purchasing a kit of your own, head on over to bourbonrealtalk.com/shop and pick one up. Thank you for listening.
Bourbon Real Talk listeners, do I have something very special for you today? We are going to discuss one of the hottest topics. What is the correct way to drink your whiskey? Should you have it neat? Should it be on rocks? Should it be on a large rock? Should it be, well, he's kind of letting the cat out of the bag. My guest today owns Howard & Sons. Is that how it's pronounced? Howard & Sons Ice Company. And we are going to get into a very fascinating topic of not only what's the right way to drink your whiskey, but also kind of the history of ice, its impact on cocktails and the growth of the spirits industry in the United States. It is going to be jam-packed with exciting, interesting information, but we're also going to try to answer the age-old question of what's the right way to drink your whiskey. So your opinion is?
No, it's not always on ice. Of course, I'm pushing that, but no. When I started to get into bourbon, I drank ice on almost all of it, and normally it was mixed with something. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the more I've gotten into it, the more I only use ice for certain ones. But if you're starting out and or you want to mix it, make cocktails, you got to have ice for any of that.
Sure.
Obviously, if you're getting into the super high end stuff, most of it, if you're spending $1,000 on a bottle of bourbon, I would recommend at least tasting it, trying it without ice first.
Yeah, sure.
And then I often, if I get something really nice, I'll get an ice cube on the side, and then get my pour neat, and then maybe do half of it neat, and then try the rest of it, pour it over a cube. Or whatnot.
Okay, all right. Well, let's dive into that. Let's talk about that. So first off, we have some of your company's ice cubes in these glasses, which you're going to have a hard time seeing on the camera because his ice is crystal clear, which is not always the case, right?
Correct.
And so usually ice has some, white feathering and things in it. Why is that?
Okay, so the cloudiness is either impurities and or air, mainly air, and it's really just, it's not that the water's dirty when you start. You can make really pure water cloudy, and you can get the most perfectly clear water there is, and that'll make cloudy, and you can make really dirty water clear. It's kind of a misconception that you have to double boil it or do all these things. Our water is just basic reverse osmosis, like when you get a bottle of water. But it's just the physics behind the way it freezes. So when you see all the clouds and the white stuff in there, the pores, that's just air that's trapped in there. I mean, sometimes it's impurities, but it's mainly just air. And what happens is it freezes from the outside in. So when you put a solo cup in the freezer, or an ice mold, whatever, that freezer is cold on all sides, except for the door. But you got 5 sides in it, so it's freezing. You got the walls of the freezer that are at -10. Because everything in the freezer eventually gets to that, but that cup of water is at 50 degrees or whatever, and then it's 0 or colder on the outside, so it starts freezing from the outside in. I'm sure you've noticed, some things, it freezes, it builds up a layer of ice on the outside, and then the layer of ice on the inside, and layer of ice, so eventually...
It gets thicker and thicker.
And so it just compacts it, but as you know, water, as it freezes, it expands. So the first layer freezes and it's clear. The second layer freezes and it's clear. The third layer freezes and it starts to get a little cloudy because all that air that was in there starts to compact in there. And also expands, which creates more air pockets and fractures and stuff. So as it's freezing from the outside in, it's continually cracking and expanding. And that's what creates the white color. And my kids say it looks like, well, why does it look like frozen milk? Most of my kids don't know that there is ice that's not clear because they don't see it. But yeah, so that's what it's mainly just air. But the air, it's a misconception that the ice that's cloudy makes your drink taste bad because there's impurities in the water. That's partly true, but it's mainly when there's air in there and there's pores on that ice cube, it absorbs whatever's in your freezer.
Well, that's pretty interesting. I guess that all makes sense, but it's something that I'd never really
You don't really
thought
think
of
about it. You think
before.
of ice is ice, and it's the last thing you think about.
And so you actually can get some off-putting flavors from the cloudy ice, probably not from the impurities, but because of scents and flavors that were in the freezer that you were freezing the
Yeah,
ice.
it's mainly the air that goes into the ice more so than the water itself. But I mean, they both make a difference.
Okay.
So
So I've heard that if you use distilled water, that it fixes this problem, and if you double boil the water, that it fixes this problem. Is there any truth to that?
yeah, it helps. I mean, the purer the water, then you're taking the impurities out, but you still have air. I mean, the physics is physics. You can't. I mean, whether it's double boiled or reverse osmosis or distilled, you're still going to have the air from the freezing from the outside and expansion that creates air pockets or cracks rather. So yeah, you're always going to have that. So you know, that's why we do this. So what we do is it's a process. Then they have these big tanks that fill with water. They're called Klein Bells, or there's other manufacturers as well. But you fill up. I don't know if you've ever seen if you go to a nice wedding and they have ice sculptures or whatnot. Then, it's the same machines that make that ice, except for ours is we don't do any ice sculptures. All we do is we produce all of our ice specifically for cocktails. So you might run across people who are doing both, but there's different processes, and it's really just you don't have any additives in the water when you're doing it for cocktails, but you want to put something that hardens the ice when you're doing sculptures and whatnot. But bottom line is you make huge blocks at a time. It takes 3 to 3.5 days to make one big block of ice. It freezes instead of like a freezer where it's freezing from the outside in. This just freezes from the bottom up. So the only cooling is on the bottom, and then the other 5 sides are insulated. So it's freezing from the bottom up, and then there's jets that are actually circulating the water the entire process for 3.5 days until you end up with a giant 300+ pound block of ice. And then you manage that, and then so each one of these cubes is actually cut from one of those blocks. So these cubes aren't made individually. It's a huge giant block that's 40 inches by 20 by 12 or whatever.
So basically, this device prevents the gas from being trapped because it doesn't freeze all from the outside in. It freezes from the bottom up.
Yeah, that's the two things. You got to have directional freeze. That's what it's called. And so it freezes from the bottom up. And then agitation, meaning the water, you either shake the machines or you just circulate the water. So
Gotcha.
that's the way it happens. And it takes 3.5 days to make one block. And yeah.
So how do you cut it up into these?
That's a little more proprietary. There's different ways to do it, but a bandsaw is the main way to do it. And then we have bandsaws that are operational to do a lot of it. Some that works for some cuts, but not for all.
Yeah.
There's special machines that make the spheres, and every type of cut is a little bit different.
So
but it's very time consuming.
Do you do spheres and also large format cubes? Okay. And so this is something that is obviously a lot more expensive than just having an ice machine in the back of your...
Yeah.
Do you sell to individual consumers or mostly to bars and restaurants?
It's mostly bars and restaurants. We do some retail and we do home delivery, but that's it's majority bars, restaurants, hotels, country clubs, and stuff like that.
This is a very interesting business concept. I think that a lot of people would probably go to one of your customers' restaurants and have no idea that all this went into making that ice cube that they order their whiskey on.
Yeah, like I said, it used to be a kind of a novelty when you saw the really clear ice cube, but now when you go out, if you're dropping, $15 on a nice whiskey or an old fashioned, you're like, and if it comes with a cloudy cube, you're now like, it's an expectation that's not being met. It's no longer a novelty. But
so who are the type of customers that you look for? Is it
obviously cocktail bars? Bowen House is a great customer, and then here we got Bonnie Roos here closer to you in Frisco. I live down in Dallas, but hotels are ideal. Ritz Carlton, they're a good one. It's perfect type of customer. So we do all their ice. We have about 150 restaurants, bars, hotels, country clubs around town, and we're just here locally. We produce it all here ourselves. It's me and 2 other guys, and my sons, but they're a little younger. They'll be getting into the business as we grow, but. They help out with putting the labels on the packages and stuff like that. They're not actually cutting yet. They're not old enough, but they will be.
Yeah.
So
how long have you been in business?
So I started about 3 years, I guess 3.5 now. So January of 17 was kind of when I went. I tried to start it on the side. I had another business and not really happy with it, but I wanted to just do something more fun. And I had ice like this on vacation. I'm like, I can't wait to get back to Dallas. I didn't know this type of ice existed. I'm going to go buy some. And then sure enough, I get back to Dallas and can't find it. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'll just make it myself. How hard can it be to make clear ice, right? And I embarked upon that process and then realized that, okay, it's really hard to make. You need a lot of space, you need a lot of room. There's a liability there because of the cutting aspects. And I realized, the reason I hadn't seen it is because restaurants, they weren't using it because they can't make it in-house. So it's another thing that I have to buy. And it was kind of just it wasn't anything that anybody cared about that much. But I knew, like, oh my gosh, after having it and falling in love with it, like, everybody's going to want this, So I tested it on some people and they're like, yeah, it's awesome. I don't know why it's not around. And I'm like, well, it's pretty expensive, but I think it might work. And so I started doing it. And I tried to just dip my toes in the water, but it's a 24/7 operation, round the clock. But it's been fruitful, and it's a lot more fun than what I was doing. So I'm 3 years in, and this is my primary gig, and
nice.
Pretty much all day, every day.
And so, general idea, you don't have to give away all of your pricing, but roughly how much does it cost for home delivery of one ice cube?
So it comes in either a bag or box. It's a little more expensive in a box, but it's roughly $40 for a box of 50 cubes. So you're adding 80 cents to the cost of your drink.
Gotcha.
But again, if you're sipping on a $100 bottle of whiskey or whatever, and you want the ice cube, it's not just for looks. I mean, like I said, there's the benefits of the more pure water, and you don't have to worry about your freezer odor absorbing in it because it's it's totally
sealed.
Dense and sealed, and the air can't get in there. And so,
well, it's funny because I actually referred you. I went to a pretty high-end restaurant that had just opened up. Sometimes when I'm out at a restaurant, especially, cash strength whiskey doesn't always go with the food that I'm drinking. But if I get something that's a little bit sweeter, flavored whiskey, and I put it on a large format cube, it's more like a cocktail, and it pairs a little bit better with the food. And so I ordered a drink, and I was like, do you have any large format cubes? And they're like, we don't know what that is. I'm like, okay, well, you can't charge $15 for a pour of this like $25, $28 bottle of whiskey.
Yeah,
and not have clear ice.
It's at least got to look better.
Maybe it's still look better, you know. So, well, why don't we try it out? We've got Stagg Jr here, which I think is going to...
So this is one where I would recommend the cube, because when you're getting up to 130 plus proof, you're talking 65+% alcohol.
Let's talk about how the ice affects the whiskey in large format versus, the smaller chunks of ice that you can get at any restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is the surface area.
Okay.
So it's going to melt slower. The less sides there are, the less, if you have 100 pieces of ice that have 6 sides each, like picture these cubes that are really small, you have more surface area, and you're gonna lose the ice faster. So it's gonna dilute it faster, and it's gonna dilute it with a less pure product. So it's gonna add more bad flavors faster. I mean, the ice is always gonna melt, but so you want to minimize the melt and minimize the amount of impurities that are being added to the solution. So that's kind of the thing.
So have you ever had any customer complaints about the ice causing the whiskey to get cloudy, like in a non-chill filtered product or whatever, where it chills it out and then it coagulates? No? I was curious about that.
I've seen that before, even with a clear ice cube, like in certain, I don't know, I mean, I was at a cigar bar, maybe it was a smoke in there, but I have noticed sometimes, I don't know what makes that happen, but every now and then, you'll see the cube's perfectly clear and the whiskey's clear, and then sometimes as it melts, the whiskey gets cloudy. And I have no idea what causes that.
I will tell you.
Okay, well,
so
educate me.
Yeah, so non-chill filtered whiskeys have fats in them that are able to make it across the still. And what the distilleries normally do is they cool the liquid down to a very cool temperature, and it causes all those fats to coagulate, like when you put taco meat in the refrigerator. And you go back in and open it up, and it's got that orange layer of stuff on top. That's fats. Just there's fats that at room temperature they are in liquid form, but if you cool them off, they'll. It's
yummy when it's liquid, but it's kind of gross looking, right?
Yeah, and so that can happen in a whiskey where when you cool it off, those fats coagulate.
Thank God. I thought it was my ice's fault. I'm like, there's something going on here I don't know about.
No, it's not the ice at all. No, that's totally normal.
I mean, I knew there was nothing wrong with it.
Right, but because you know your ice is amazing. And so drinking this, because this is Stagg Jr Batch 12. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Yeah,
And it's that proof. So yeah, it's 66.15%
Yeah, so this is
alcohol.
batch 12.
That's 50% stronger than a regular whiskey.
Right. It's quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it. I like that one on a cube.
And so, and that's understandable. And what I find interesting is trying these whiskeys side by side, one neat and one on this, larger format cube. You're getting a lot more of the sweeter vanillin flavors on the whiskey that's got a little bit of water in it, and a little bit. Obviously, it's less harsh.
Yeah, I think that you're not as, your heat senses, they're not as heightened, so you can kind of notice some of the undertones that you wouldn't notice if you were feeling the burn with a 66% alcohol whiskey.
So, but what I'm losing on the back end is some of the nuance of the tobacco and chocolate flavors.
Yeah.
So I'm getting a lot more pleasant, softer, upfront flavor of vanillin and, some wood sugar notes, toffee, caramel, less of the fruit in the mid palate, and not a whole lot of the finish flavors that I get. But
go ahead and take that cube out then. You don't want to ruin it.
No. But it's not worse.
No, I agree. But
it's a different experience.
There is a point though in which, when you're making a cocktail, you're cooling that liquid with ice before you put it on the ice. So a cocktail, if you were doing an old fashioned, that drink is chilled before you pour it over the cube. So then that sits there in that old fashioned, the ice, you already got the liquid to 33 degrees. You got the ice cube that's, 20 degrees or whatever. So that's going to stay, that ice cube is going to melt very slowly. But when you pour 70-degree whiskey over your ice cube, it's going to start melting pretty quick. It doesn't matter how dense and clear and big it is. When you're pouring 70-degree liquid on top of it, it's going to start melting. So what I do even with this is I'll pull it out. I'll put the ice cube in, start to sip on it, and when I get to the way I want it, then the flavor profiles and the dilution, I'd pull the cube out at that point.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's the same thing as adding a few drops of water, but it also changes the temperature. And I like my drinks. If I do Coke, I fill the cup up all the way with ice, and then put 4 ounces of Coke in, and it's nice. So I like it as cold as I can. And so that's why I do it. But
so ice has actually had a pretty interesting history in the United States. I don't even remember what it was that I was watching or I read. I can't remember if it's a documentary or if I heard a podcast on it. But there was a gentleman who was the ice king, right?
Yeah, and I'm not gonna pretend to be an historian here, an expert. Yeah, the guy Frederick Tudor called the Ice King. He started to commercialize and export ice by harvesting it. I think it was off the Great Lakes.
The Great Lakes, yeah.
I don't know exactly where it would harvest it from, but long story. He tried to do it several times, went bankrupt, got more money, and then eventually he's kind of the founder of commercializing ice and having people drink cold drinks instead of regular drinks. And that was back in the early 1800s. And then, fast forward, and ice was already popularized by him. It started being, popular for cocktails. It was a way when it became socially acceptable for women to go to bars. Well, they didn't just want neat whiskey or a room temperature beer or cooled beer. They wanted, ice. They wanted cocktails. So when it was socially acceptable for women to go to bars and stuff, they often wanted chilled drinks. And then men followed suit because they're like, oh, this is actually pretty good. I like it too. But back then, they were getting ice from the lakes. Not all of it, but if there was enough of an undercurrent, the ice would freeze clearly, just like this.
Right.
So they would...
because you've got the water moving underneath, and it's freezing only from the top down.
It's the exact opposite of the machines. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But so you have, the world is kind of an insulator, and then you got the currents underneath, and then the really cold temperature freezing it downward as it goes. But anyway, you cut that up, and then they bring out these huge blocks, and then cut all those down. Or I think it was more often broken at those points. There were some things later on where they would cut them, but for the most part, it was those huge blocks, and they would break it up at the bar. So they bring you your block to the bar, and then use ice picks and stuff, and they sell you. In your drink, you'd get a really rugged but clear, cool ice cube. So, our grandparents or great grandparents, if they were going to the bars back then, they probably had ice that looked more like this than your Sonic ice or whatever you get now.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of fun to go back in history. I mean, I did a little bit of research, and
It was so fascinating to me because this was before commercial refrigeration. And
Yeah.
so they would harvest these huge blocks of ice, and Tudor, whatever his name was, had to figure out a way to protect it from melting. And so he would pack it in like sawdust and all this stuff.
And hay and whatever, and just pack it super close together.
Super tight, and he figured out that, you know, it was like a modern day Yeti cup, right? Like it would keep the ice cold, and he would ship it like to the Caribbean and hot places even, because ice became such a, almost like a status symbol, like people wanted to have it in their drinks. And then commercial refrigeration came along, and we have access to ice everywhere all the time, especially here in the United States. But it's not the good ice that they started
Well, and
with.
that's what happened. So ice became just a commodity.
Right.
And so it was like, who can do it the fastest and the cheapest? And like kind of what it was originally when it started, that artistic kind of thing. It wasn't artistic back then. It was just the only way to do it. Mm-hmm. But, you know, as processes and inventions came along and refrigeration, it just became a lot cheaper and easier to do it. Like your ice machine and your refrigerator and stuff. Mm-hmm. But so is this ever going to replace like all the ice no, it's always going to have a very strong labor component. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be readily available everywhere you go, but it is, there's definitely a difference to it, and it was kind of lost for a while, and it just started coming back, within the last 5 years for sure.
It sure is pretty.
Well, thank you.
Well, so let's try to tackle the question about the right way to drink whiskey. I think most people start off drinking, whiskey with Coke, usually inexpensive whiskey with Coke. And then often people will transition from that to drinking it on ice, preferably a quality ice cube, but probably not. Most people are just drinking it over whatever ice their ice machine spits out. And often people will then transition from there to maybe having it with just a little bit of water, which...
Well, I think there's a step in between. I think most people that are getting introduced to whiskey, they go out, and I mean, say you had your Jack and Coke in high school, but now you're going out to bars, you get an old fashioned. And that's where I think the step in between is having a cocktail with whiskey and being like, huh. And then the more of those old fashions you drink, the more you're kind of like, you know what, that's too much simple syrup. That's a little too much. Yeah. There's too many bitters in there. I don't really need the cherry. I don't need the orange. And then when you get down to it, it's like, like where I am now, like I want either a really high-end bourbon or a middle-of-the-road bourbon with some bitters that I like. Right. So that my old-fashioned is an ice cube, bourbon, and some bitters now.
Really? Okay. Yeah. All right.
Maybe a cherry if I have a good one.
Maybe cherry if you're feeling crazy. Yeah, and then people will often transition from that to maybe just a little bit of water. Then they'll transition from a little bit of water to maybe no water. And often if you get really deep in the whiskey game, you start to try higher and higher proof spirits, because a lot of the less expensive whiskeys that you can get are 80 proof whiskeys. And you work your way up, you start getting some bottle and bonds at 100 proof, and then you start to get some special release, cask strength or full proof whiskeys that are higher. And I guess the answer to the question of what's the right way to drink your whiskey is...
Whiskey's a very broad term, and
right.
I mean, who knows? I mean,
it's however you like it.
I like it neat. I like it on ice. I like it in a cocktail.
Yeah. So if you're listening out there, there is no wrong way to drink your whiskey.
Well, from a personal perspective, I say drink it however you want. But from a business perspective, I say always, put it on a clear ice cube.
On a clear ice cube. That makes perfect sense. But I will say there are some faux pas, if you will, right, that you should probably try to avoid. And generally it has to do with the collectability or desirability of the spirit, right? And so if you're talking about a whiskey that there's 10,000 people who want every one bottle, if you publicly, let people see you consume that spirit in a way that seems like you're not respecting the spirit, people will get offended at that, because they're thinking...
Like when you mix Pappy with a fruit punch or whatever.
Yeah, like if you...
The Yeti commercial?
Yeah, or if you mix, I heard a story about a guy that went into Haymarket or one of the higher end, bourbon bars that's in Louisville or somewhere in Kentucky, and said, "What's the most expensive bourbon you have?" And of course, it was Pappy 23. And the guy says, "Well, I'll get one of those and Diet Pepsi," right? And the bartender eventually refused to make his drink for him. He gave him his drink in a glass like this,
and then gave him a Diet Pepsi.
And then gave him a Diet Pepsi and said, "You're going to have to do it. Right? I'm not going to not sell it to you, but I'm not going to disrespect this spirit because there are, 20,000 people that wish that they could taste what you're about to mix with another drink." And so I think that while the old adage of, drink your whiskey the way that you like it is absolutely true, I think that there's kind of a little asterisk to that.
Well, I think because you're doing that for show. I mean, nobody would really prefer their Pappy 23 with a Pepsi. It's a statement. It's an FU statement. Like,
right.
"Oh, I'm such a big wig. Look at me. I don't care about this money."
I don't even care else. Yeah.
It's not that they actually prefer it. It's they just want to show off the fact that they can do it. And so do I think you can actually disrespect a whiskey? I'm not that much of a whiskey snob. I think that's kind of a little bit silly, like treating whiskey like a person or something like that. Because, I guess, because there were, so many people behind making that what it was, but
I actually do spend some time thinking about that. When I think about a spirit and I think about, like, for instance,
what all went into making it.
Right. Like, was this a nameless, faceless corporation that sourced from all these different sources or contract distilled and put it through the process as quickly as possible so they could get it in a bottle and make some money? Or was this, someone's family legacy that they poured their heart and soul into this, and they, hope and pray that every single bottle ends up in the hands of somebody that's going to open it and enjoy it and create memories with this spirit and all that stuff? I feel like the Van Winkles feel that way. I feel like a lot of the people that work at Buffalo Trace feel like that about the, antique collection or any of their special releases. I feel like, the Parker Heritage Collection and some of the other special releases, they could have blended that into many other brands that have major distribution and they make tons and tons of money off of because it's high volume, but they took the time to pull those barrels and make them separate and to do something special. And I do want to honor that. But the other thing is that there is a little bit of a troll culture, right? In our society in general, but specifically in the whiskey enthusiast community. And there are those people out there that will mix a Pappy 23 with a Diet Pepsi just to get people riled up.
To get attention. And I've kind of actually backed off a lot of the bourbon groups. I don't really do that much on Facebook anymore. And it's you get all these people who just want attention. And that's somebody who wants attention, who has a lot of money, and
I have to be honest. I'm in.
They're right to do so, but would I do it? No. If I was that rich, would I do it? No. But whatever.
Right, but you don't want that. You don't want that kind of attention, right? But this kind of transitions into a larger subject. But I'm probably in 25 different Facebook groups that are whiskey enthusiast communities of various types, and there's really only one that I participate in at the fullest extent that I can with the amount of time that I have to do it. And it's because the culture's a little bit different there. But there is that.
Which one is that?
It's Someone Say Whiskey. And I'm an admin of that club.
Gotcha.
So I do have some influence over its culture. But most of the other clubs, you'll see where people are posting a comment that they know is misinformation, but they're doing it to screw with people, right? Or you'll see somebody take a bottle of Happy 20 and, fill it up with tea or whatever and then chug it or pour it out or whatever, right? And I just don't think that is good for the future of the spirits industry. It's not good for the future of bars and restaurants or cocktail culture or anything, because it makes it not fun for everyone except for the troll, right? And that's why the subject of what's the right way to drink your whiskey is interesting. I think there are some like
You've sold me a little bit, like
Yeah.
respect the whiskey itself, because I think about respecting people. I'm very focused on that, but never really thought about.
there's
But
a lot of-
you are respecting the people by
there's a lot of
respecting the
people
whiskey.
behind
Yeah,
that brand,
that
right?
makes sense. You've
So for
changed my
instance,
mind a little bit.
when I go to a restaurant, if they have large format cubes, I often will order a bullet rye on a large format cube because, and a lot of people don't know this, and I'm sure I'm going to get some negative comments on this, but rye whiskey is the only mash bill whiskey that by law can be adulterated. So you actually can.
What do you mean by law it can be adulterated? Like,
Well, because there's like, bourbon
Yeah,
can be
51,
no
yeah, there's four,
adulteration, and but rye you're allowed.
you can
to,
still call yourself rye.
You can call yourself rye, a straight rye, whatever, but you can put up to 2.5% of additives in it. Okay, and almost no one knows this, and please don't, just Google it before you attack me. And I believe Bullet is one that has some adulteration. It's a little bit sweeter, and so I love it. I like the product. It's good, but it's also okay over ice for me because it's a little bit sweeter. So that dilution.
For you, it's cocktail in a bottle. It's a pre-mixed cocktail for you,
right? And it goes well with food because it's a little bit sweeter and all that. So I'll order that, from time to time. And so I drink. There's some whiskeys that I like to mix with root beer,
I'm a Coke guy. I don't do root beer. I don't do Diet Pepsi,
Yeah,
but I'll do Woodford and Coke as like my throwback.
Your throwback, yeah.
That's my.
And so I drink a wide variety of styles, and I'll order old fashions from time to time. So I don't think there's really a right way, but I think that there is something to be said for the effort that went into the spirit. And if it's a specialty release or something like that, I would prefer that you try it neat. And
Yeah, you can always put ice in it later.
Right.
You can't
And
you can't
maybe
take the water back out.
You can't take the water back out, or maybe if it's too strong for you, maybe add a little water, or put it over cube and remove the cube. Do something like that before you. And if you were ever doing something to piss people off, like mixing it with Pepsi, just don't do that, because what are you gaining? I mean, you're getting attention, but the troll culture that exists in the whiskey world will cause people to not continue to enter into this hobby, and that ultimately hurts us all. Because
I think when more people enter in, it hurts us more, because then we have to pay more for it.
No,
I'm kidding.
Right now, and this is something that people don't think about. All of the Kentucky distilleries, almost all of them, have entered into. They've brought on more investment capital, and
they're ramped up.
They're doubling capacity,
Yeah.
right? Almost all of them. At the same time that we have a trade war going on, and exports are down tremendously. So what happens in the long term if this continues? Well, we're going to lose a lot of brands. A lot of people are going to go unemployed. There's going to be a glut of whiskey, and yes, we'll be able to get things that we couldn't get before.
But are all the
those
distilleries going
lines
to
are
stay
going
open?
to go away.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That what's good for the future is for the cocktail culture to continue, for high-end bars and restaurants to continue to offer an experience and a service that people are willing to pay a premium for more people to enter into this hobby, because business grows off of that stuff, and anything that tamps that down, like the troll culture that exists in the whiskey community or anything like that, I think that it's bad for the long-term future of this thing that we all love, this hobby that we all love.
So would I be part of the troll culture if I said, let's pour some Pappy 15 on a cube? Just a legitimate question. Not that I really want to drink his Pappy. I mean, I will, but we'll see.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I think that's okay. But I would want you to try it neat first.
That's where I always go, and that's my takeaway. Just if you want to do it on a cube, just serve it separately.
Right.
Like have a glass with a cube like this and a Glencairn or whatever with the whiskey straight.
I don't feel like that's disrespecting the whiskey though, because truth is that when they are tasting those barrels to determine whether or not they're going to let it go to be a Pappy 15 or they're going to let it go to be a Pappy 20.
Are there traces of water in the glass?
Oh, yeah, they water it down to like 40 proof or 60 proof. It's like
really I never
proof.
knew that.
And the reason why is because
you tasted at different proofs to see.
No, when they tasted at a very low proof because it's easier to detect flaws in a lower proof spirit.
Because you don't have to deal with the burn. So it's not as good tasting, but you can detect things.
Which is why a lot of people who get really involved in the whiskey world develop into drinking all cask strength whiskeys. You can have a mediocre whiskey at cask strength, and it's going to taste pretty good because the flavors are so big. But if you water that same whiskey down to 60 proof, and I believe that's the proof that most large distilleries taste at is at 60 proof.
So Buffalo Trace is at 90 proof, your Jack Daniels is at 80, so you're bringing it down to 60 proof, which is 30% alcohol.
And that's when you're going...
It's like 75% of like a regular bourbon.
Right, this barrel is good, and so we're gonna let it continue on and become something else. This barrel is just okay, so we're gonna blend it with a bunch of other okay barrels, and we're gonna make that into a lower level product, right? And so if the distilleries taste it at 60 proof to identify its nature, I'm not offended if somebody wants to take a spirit and put it on a cube and allow dilution to water it down.
But if you're going to pour Diet Pepsi on it, yeah.
Right. And so I'm less offended at there's like a hierarchy, right? So if I'm in a high-end restaurant or a bar that's got a bunch of high-end whiskeys and we're all sitting around having pours and talking, and some jackwagon comes in and orders a Pappy 23, if he mixes it with Diet Pepsi, I'm pissed, right? If he...
Well, because he's not trying to taste the whiskey, he's trying to be a troll.
If he adds some water, I'm like, okay, bro, I see what you're doing. You enjoy it the way that you enjoy it, right? If he puts it over
but
a
it's
cube,
still whiskey at
I'm
that
like,
point.
okay, I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
But once you start like mixing it with something that's going to change its flavor so much that you can't taste what the original product was, at that point you're just trying to show everybody how you can waste.
Dilution is different than mixing.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I've never been one of those people to post something like, how do you do this? Or, I'm going to do this. Is this okay? And everybody goes back and forth like, no, neat only or whatever. But
and that's hilarious.
But Scotch, go back to Scotch, the history of Scotch exceeds, in duration, the whole bourbon scene. And that's very typical. Whenever you go to a Scotch tasting, they're always, have droppers of water. You're intentionally watering it down. The thing is how the rate at which you dilute it and how much you dilute it. That's important to pick up on all those notes and the flavor profiles. But just to add some water, whether you drop an ice cube in for a little bit and then take it out, or you leave it in for longer, or you put just straight water in the whiskey, like that doesn't make you not a whiskey connoisseur. It means you're trying to detect flavors at different temperatures and different different proofs and all that.
And I think that what causes people to get triggered is the concept that this whiskey that we all wish that we could be drinking, that you have just purchased, like, if you're not able to appreciate it for what it is, then why not just get something else and then water that thing down and pay attention to whatever that is, right? I guess in conclusion, on this subject, I think that there is no wrong way to drink whiskey. Like you should
Diet Pepsi is the wrong way. I thought we already determined that.
No, there is no wrong way to drink whiskey.
That's the wrong way to drink a special whiskey.
You should drink your whiskey the way that you want. You should not drink specialty whiskeys in a way that they were not designed to be drank just for the troll value of the comp. So if people want to get more information about you and your company, where do they go?
So the website is called blockcut.com. The company's Howard and Sons Ice Company. We're on Facebook and we have Instagram, I think. I'm not really that active. I don't do the social media thing. Again, when I went to the old-fashioned way to make ice, I also went to the old-fashioned way to build business. And I mean, we have a little bit of a presence. I haven't focused that much on it just because, I want to go out and meet the people. I want to go talk to the bar owners, the bar managers, the bartenders. Like that's the fun part. So, yes, you can find us on the internet. We have a website. We have a Facebook page. Instagram is pretty nominal. We don't do that much because, again, we're not selling that much direct to public. We do it. Happy to do it. Love to do it. It helps us out. But it's mainly, the bars and restaurants. And so those are people that I like to go in and meet and talk to those people and build those relationships and go drink whiskey at their bars, because I don't want to buy a bottle of every single thing that I'm interested in. I like to go out and taste it at the bars.
That's awesome.
Hopefully we'll be able to do that again pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're starting to open up a little bit. Got to social distance a bit, but
we're 6 feet, right? Close enough.
Ish.
4.5.
Yeah. 4.5. We sanitized.
Something like that.
Sanitized.
Definitely.
Yeah. And we couldn't wear masks on account of we were drinking.
Yeah.
So.
Sanitize a little more here.
Yeah, here you go. Yeah, that's right. I sanitized my throat.
So I'm pouring this one directly over the ice cube because I know at 66% alcohol, I want a little water.
A little bit of water. So if you want to get more information about Bourbon Real Talk, you can reach us at bourbonrealtalk.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on your favorite podcast player. And we are now able to be searched for at youtube.com/Bourbon Real Talk. You actually have to qualify for that. That doesn't happen automatically.
I don't qualify for many things.
Yeah, so we are at youtube.com/Bourbon Real Talk. And if you woke up this morning and you were unsure whether or not anyone loved you, just know that I love you. And I'll see you next time on Bourbon Real Talk. Cheers.